Black-headed vultures can be a livestock aggressor. They can be found throughout the Midwest. They're a very aggressive species, which often prey on baby calves and baby lambs. While they can be a nuisance to farmers, getting rid of them is not that simple. Last month, a number of U.S. senators introduced new legislation that, if passed, would allow farmers and ranchers to fight back against black vultures threatening their livestock.
They are federally protected. They are a migratory bird. And being protected means that they can't be harmed unless a livestock producer is given permission through a permit.
If a black-headed vulture has preyed on livestock, that livestock producer is recommended to contact their local USDA Farm Service agency and ask about the Livestock Indemnity Program. Well, part of the beauty of sport